my name is Kaylee Ray, and today I will be talking about the 25 books I've read thus far in 2025. Jumping straight into things, the first book that I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This book follows Addie LaRue, and she was cursed with not being able to be remembered, except for one day one person finally remembers her, and it kind of takes you on her journey through that. I ended up giving this 4.75 stars. I was in a book slump at the end of the year, and so this book was very quick, very engaging. It jumped different timelines and was very similar to historical fiction meet fantasy meet contemporary romance. It was all the things that I needed, and I also read this on Kindle Unlimited. The next book that I read was The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I ended up giving this book 2.5 stars. I know that this book was very, very popular last year, and it was a great book club book. This was our book club book for the month of January. The reason that I decided to rate it so low was the magic system. The basic premise of this book is that Clementine moves into her aunt's apartment after her aunt passes away, but the apartment seems to be magical and takes her back 7 years, where she meets this man in her apartment, and it kind of goes from there. The magic system was so hard to stand behind and defend that I was starting to get frustrated towards the end. The third book that I read this year is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. I gave this book 4 stars. This was actually a very controversial book this year. The basic premise, without giving too much away, is that it follows right after Iron Flame. Big things happen with Andarna, big things happen for Violet and Xaden, and it's a book that tried to tie up a lot of loose ends, but still kind of opened new questions. The fourth book I read this year was actually The Last Letter by Rebecca Yarros. I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it a 3.5 stars. I had never read up until this point a Rebecca Yarros contemporary fiction, and Fourth Wing is actually her first time stepping out of contemporary fiction land, so I was really happy to read it. Ella, our main character, and this other soldier have been riding back and forth. Ella's brother is in the military as well, and sadly her brother has passed. She has 2 kids that I thought were decently written. I know children in books become very controversial, but them being 7, I think that Rebecca Yarros actually did a bad job. The 5th book that I read this year, and also my first 5-star of the year, is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. The basic premise is that 39 women and 1 girl are locked in this underground sort of bunker controlled by these men. This book has wonderful writing, is well thought out, and very highly rated for good reasons. The next book that I read was actually a short story collection called Homesick for Another World. I find that short story collections of something that I'm very interested in or by authors I really much enjoy help me get back into wanting to read again. I ended up giving this 3.75 stars. The basic premise of all of these stories are different ways to be homesick for another world, whether that is homesick and yearning to be somewhere else, or feeling like you don't belong and where you really do belong is far away. The next book that I read is my lowest rated book this year. In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife. I gave 1.5 stars. I am a huge Dark Academia fan, and a lot of the times, besides The Secret History and If We Were Villains, Dark Academia always has a fantasy setting. So I really was excited to read this book because it's Dark Academia without the fantasy. The reason I didn't DNF it was actually because it was on my physical TBR and I'm trying to get through it. I feel like these characters were not fleshed out. The storyline made no sense, and I hated a lot of the characters. Like, a lot. One thing about me, I'm gonna hate read a book. The next book that I read was actually a really big surprise that I rated it so highly. It is Kevin Wilson's Nothing to See Here. Lillian and Madison are college best friends, and as they grow up, Lillian goes one direction, Madison goes another, but one day Madison calls up Lillian and says that she needs help babysitting her stepkids. But the thing is that when the stepkids get upset, they burst into flames. I read it on Kindle Unlimited, so if you're looking for a Kindle Unlimited recommendation, this one for sure is it. The next book I read is actually another really highly rated Kindle Unlimited book, which is The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchinson. We find out that there's this secret garden where women are being abducted and turned into butterflies. The 10th book I read this year is actually a memoir classic, Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen. I would say that this book kind of reads similar to a short story collection because each chapter is a little event. The next book that I read was Megan Nolan's Acts of Desperation. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Our main character, who remains nameless, is very desperate for love. I would not have made the same choices, but I definitely can see where she came to those conclusions. The next book that I read was Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I was in what you would call a weird girl literature kick. This is another Kindle Unlimited read that I had on my TBR for a very long time. In this book, our main character works at a bar, but is also an erotic photographer, but not in the way that you would think. If you like weird girls being crazy, this book is for you. The 13th book that I read this year is actually The Wedding People. This was my March book club pick, and I was very, very excited to read it. This book is about our main character going to a hotel to sadly kill herself, but she runs into the bride, and the bride has very much issue with that. I gave this book 4.5 stars. The next book I read was actually my most anticipated read for this year, Sunrise on the Reaping. This book takes place during the 50th Hunger Games, where we see past mentor Haymitch. I would actually say that this book takes the top book slot from Catching Fire of best book in the series. The next book that I read was Strawberry Patch Pancake House by Lori Gilmore. I was obsessed with Pumpkin Spice Cafe. If I can go into a book being like, this is going to be a cringy romance, I eat it up. Iris is essentially this town's equivalent of Kirk in Gilmore Girls. I would recommend this book if you love little Hallmark romances, you want a quick read. I gave this book 4.5 stars. The next book that I read was Lane Fargo's The Favorites. Everyone kept telling me that it was exactly like Daisy Jones and the Six because of that interview style. And I agree. This book is about 2 ice skaters and kind of their entire lives. I ended up doing the audiobook and I really enjoyed it because, much like Daisy Jones and the Six, this audiobook also has different actors for every single character. The next book that I read is Cinnamon Bun Bookstore, and I didn't like it. I read the first, the third, the fourth, and then the second book in this Dream Harbor series by Lori Gilmore. I didn't enjoy the mystery aspect, and I didn't love our main characters. This was a really bad Hallmark movie. And I'm sorry, but I have to be honest. I give this book 1.75 stars. Next, I reread The Perks of Being a Wildflower. The Perks of Being a Wildflower tells an amazing and very vulnerable story of Charlie through these letters that he sends to this anonymous person and about his experience going through high school and the people that he meets and the connections that he makes. I gave it 4.25 stars. Next, I read The Handmaid's Tale. Our main character becomes a handmaid, and you get to find out a bit of the society, about how male-centered it is, about how women really have 0 rights. If you're looking for a Kindle Unlimited read and a banned book, I'd recommend this. Following that book, I actually read the second and final book in this duology, The Testaments. We get the point of view of somebody who lives in Canada, so outside of Gilead or America. We get the point of view of a girl who lives in Gilead, and then we get the perspective of one of the top women in the society. I ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. Next, I reread After. I was in a book slump, and I loved After when I was 15. It is a cringy and stupid book, and not a lot of people like it, but I love how horrible it is. I enjoyed how horrible the characters are to each other and to everyone around them. It fed my 15-year-old soul to reread it. Next, I finished our book club's April pick, which is The Madman's Daughter. This is a YA book, but reading it, there was a lot of gore. Now, I'm 20, so I can handle that. The premise is that this girl, who is now an orphan, is kind of banished from society because her dad got ran out of town and killed because of his experiments. But we find out that she might not have been told the entire truth and kind of goes on an adventure to figure it out. I gave this book 3.5 stars. The 23rd book I read this year was Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This book has been on my physical TBR and my radar for literally months. But sadly, I gave this book a 2.5 stars, and I genuinely think it's because it was so overhyped. Essentially, our couple, Leah and Miri, have been together forever. Miri is a marine biologist who is sent underwater, and sadly their submarine gets lost. And something's going wrong with Miri. She's acting very different, and Leah thinks that it's because of the water. The 24th book I read this year is actually After We Collided. I really needed to remember what happened in the second book because I could not remember. It was interesting. I ended up giving this book 2.75 stars. I finished it for the funniness and the plot, but I wouldn't recommend it. I really wouldn't. I ended up giving this book 2.75 stars. The final book that I just finished literally today is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Ballad of Songbirds just never disappoints. As a huge Hunger Games fan, both as a 20-year-old but also as a 12-year-old, this book is so wonderfully written. I ended up giving it a 4.5 stars. I am obsessed with this book and the movie, but the movie doesn't even do it justice. The basic premise of this book is that it takes place during the 10th Hunger Games, where we see Coriolanus Snow, who is President Snow in the original Hunger Games trilogy, and sort of his coming of age and how he gets involved with the whole mess of the Hunger Games. I gave this book 4.5 stars. Those are the 25 books that I have read this year. I am very, very excited that this is my very first video on this channel. I will see you guys in the next one.